So, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back after our lovely little short break. One of the fascinating aspects of soccer in this country is obviously the draft and how that works between college and the pros. And here to speak about that this morning is Steve Holroyd. Steve is a Philadelphia area labor attorney who's been collecting primary sources on U.S. soccer since his teens, and writing about it ever since the internet gave him a place to publish his articles. When he's not lawyering or tweeting angrily about the state of U.S. soccer, or researching and writing soccer and lacrosse history pieces, he can be found limping around, not really limping, but limping around on the South Jersey soccer fields, still sweeping in an over 35 league. So, Steve, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. I think with the, along with James, I'm the only other non-academic in the, I'm the only other non-academic in the room. And usually I start things by saying, may it please the court, when we're addressing a court. And of course the irony is I have no interest in pleasing the court. I'm here to convince them of something. But I am here to please you, so may it please the audience. I'm here to talk today about the college draft, and particularly in connection with this weekend, how successful the draft was at finding future Hall of Famers. Well, ultimately, there are only 5 of them. That's it. So, any questions? I'm done. No, there were only 5, and of course, there are reasons why the draft wasn't as successful in soccer as you might expect it to have been in other sports. And we could start with the elephant in the room. The one problem soccer in this country has always had, and it continues to have, as far as really getting firmly implanted in the national psyche, is that concept of American exceptionalism. You know, we tend to play our own sports. Even though there were fine sports like cricket and rugby out there, we nevertheless felt compelled as a people to invent baseball and invent gridiron football. And you know, American soccer was no different. I mean, even in the 1920s, the ASL was fooling with substitutions, fooling with a penalty box, I think in 1925. We always feel the need to tweak. And this culture clash, this American exceptionalism in sport would rear its head when the North American Soccer League tried to incorporate the concept of a college draft as a way to bring more Americans to the game. You know, from the very start, starting in 1967, the powers that be behind American professional soccer trying to bring it back realized that the long-term growth of the game would require Americans to start playing and eventually to star in it. That was the type of thing that was going to be necessary to get the so-called casual fan fully invested in the sport. So the question became, where do you find such players? Well, to the owners, who were by and large American businessmen, American sportsmen, there seemed to be a real simple answer. We'll go with the draft. Made perfect sense. Since 1935, the National Football League had a draft, and it worked great. The colleges developed your players for free. There was no need for minor leagues like baseball and hockey had. And of course, the other big advantage of a draft is that there were built-in wage controls. If a star player coming out of college was drafted, which means only one team could negotiate with him, he couldn't extort a premium salary out of him. The problem is, those were the American owners. The guys on the ground, the coaches, tended to be foreign, primarily British. And they thought the draft was nonsense. Like, look, what's this draft? What you do, you go out, you sign them young. You have your academies, you have a reserve team. That's how you build it that way. So they didn't get the concept at all. But that costs money. So you had the American owners saying, hey, look, no, that costs money. We let the colleges do it here. Let's follow along. And in theory, there was plenty of room for compromise. If you could fully explain to those British coaches, hey, don't worry, you don't have to worry about the academies here. Here, the universities do that for us. They might have gotten on board because, after all, you get a higher return on investment because you're not making any investment. Again, the colleges do it. There's one slight problem. In the 70s, late 60s, college soccer was not very good, and particularly coaching was not very good. So throughout the use of the college draft in the NASL, and the narrative says from 1972 to 1984, but I have a little surprise for you, that was always the loggerheads. It's like, you want us to, the college, the pro coaches would say, look, you want us to find Americans using this college system, but the college system just isn't very good. There's different rules, you know, the coaching's bad. Nevertheless, there were drafts. And here's the big surprise, and this is what prompted my article. You pick up an NASL media guide and you see the first college draft was in 1972. Alan Macca, son of 1950s U.S. World Cup player. Joe Macca was the first ever pick, and it went on until the league folded until 1984. However, there was a draft in 1968. In fact, there were 3 drafts. There was what we'll call a free agent draft for anyone who was out of college but otherwise unaffiliated, a second draft, which was your traditional college draft, and a third draft, which was basically a draft to claim players who are on transfer lists in other countries. Again, in an attempt to, I guess, keep teams from bargaining against one another. So, and the 68 draft got lost to time, as did a lot of 1968's history, because as the league was close to collapse, people were literally just throwing things into the dumpster. So, but you know, it would be pretty boring just to talk about the 68 draft. So what we're going to look at was, let's look at all the drafts and see just how successful was the draft at aiding the Americanization of the game throughout the North American Soccer League's history. So I focused primarily on 1972 to 84. Because again, 68, they had the draft in June. The season was over by September. The league was almost folded by a month later. So it's not really fair to hold the fact that no one in the 68 draft, only one person in the 68 draft actually played in the NASL. So that would throw off the percentages. So from 72 to 84, 851 men, and interestingly 2 women, were drafted. But we're going to talk about the men. Of those 851 men, 299 appeared in at least one North American Soccer League game, 35%. Sounds all right. We'll have some comparables in a second. About 100 fewer, 191, managed to play 10 or more games, 22.5%. Only 81 played 50 or more matches. 81 folks who were drafted played 50 or more matches. Now we're talking 9.5%. And ultimately, only 3 Hall of Famers, based upon their NASL careers, who were drafted between 72 and 84, made it. That's 0.035%. I think we call it basis points, 35 basis points. Again, infinitesimal, not very successful as a whole. And to give you an idea of how other sports do it, in the paper that we submitted for this, I look at the 1979 draft, because 1979 seemed like, to me, that was the peak of the North American Soccer League. It was 1 year after the great expansion. It remained stable. There was only 1 franchise relocation. No one else was moving. Everyone else was still positive. You know, 1980 had no franchise relocations, but come 81, the foldings and the relocations start. So 79 seemed like a good draft to look at. So I compared the 79 NASL draft to the drafts in other sports. So the NFL draft, for instance, 72% of the people taken in the 1979 NFL draft played at least 1 NFL game, and ultimately 3 Hall of Famers. That seems high. Again, to be fair, think about it. Football, high churn, short careers, it's a brutal sport, so it makes sense that draftees get more of an opportunity quicker. Conversely, the NBA, their 79 draft, 27%, only 27% played in at least 1 game, and only 1 Hall of Famer, who, if you're curious, was Magic Johnson. But again, that makes sense. Basketball, fewer opportunities, longer careers, you know. The NHL, 82% of the individuals drafted in the 79 entry draft got to play in at least 1 game, with ultimately 5 Hall of Famers. But, again, apples to apples, the NHL had the luxury of time. Those kids worked their way up through the minors. That 82% did not play in the 79, not all of them played in the 79-80 season. There was a longer gestation rate, and even out of the Hall of Famers, I think one was a 5th round pick. I think Glenn Anderson was a 5th round pick, and he's in the Hall of Fame. Gives you an idea how hockey works. In the North American Soccer League, in the 1979 draft, 55% of those drafted played in at least one game. Not bad compared to the others. 0 Hall of Famers in that draft. The numbers get a little less flattering when you realize only 30% played that year in 79, and only 10% played for more than 10 games or 500 minutes that year. So, question it has to be asked, why was the draft so unsuccessful? Why, I mean, you would think it was the only game in town to bring North Americans into the league, which of course was the NASL's primary goal. Were North American players really that bad? And the answer would be no. Frankly, the draft success is somewhat skewed because a number of great American players of the era skipped the draft. They signed early. They were poached, or they just signed early. So that skews the numbers. Also, to be fair, all right, there remained a strong bias against college players. I mean, the foreign coaches, they weren't all that eager to play Americans generally. You know, the North American Soccer League had those rules saying X amount of North Americans had to be on the field, and let's be blunt, and I remember because I was a player of that age. I graduated high school the year before the NASL folded, and I was decent enough that I looked at it as an opportunity, and I could see we weren't really getting an opportunity because, you know, coaches would jump at an opportunity the minute someone got naturalized. So those 3 North American spots were inevitably being filled by an experienced, you know, in some cases World Cup capped foreign player who got his citizenship and was filling one of those spots. But also because there was this view that colleges were ruining players. In the paper that I wrote, you'll see I have a lot of quotes from coaches saying, oh, it's the college, the pro coaches saying the college game is ruining these players and everything else. So I did a little side analysis. Starting in 1978, North American Soccer League teams were allowed to draft high school players. So I said, okay, let's see if getting them out of high school, where they weren't being, quote, ruined by the college coaches, if it had any difference, and the data shows it doesn't. High school draftees fared even worse than those who went to college as far as playing time. 135 high schoolers were drafted. 16 only played 10 or more games, 12%. Only 7 appeared in 50 more games, 5%. So that's a bit of a myth. You know, it wasn't, colleges weren't ruining these kids. In fact, what was probably more helpful was college may be bad, but at least you were getting playing time. They weren't getting playing time when they went to the North American Soccer League because there were no, although some teams tried, there was no sophisticated system of reserve teams. Only one team, Seattle, actually tried to build an academy. There was no USL. There was no minor league. You had the American Soccer League, but they were competing against one another. So ultimately, the draft wasn't as successful. So remember at the beginning I said there were 5 Hall of Famers. Who wants to take a guess as to who the 5 Hall of Famers who made it professionally through the draft?
Well, Kyle Rote.
Kyle Rote was one. Drafted first overall by Dallas, 8th overall in 1972.
Warner Wolf?
No.
Bobby Smith.
Bobby Smith, 3rd round with Philadelphia in 1973, 19th overall. You've got 2 so far.
Al Trost.
Al Trost, which, Roger, I'm sure cheated. Al Trost was drafted in the 68 draft. Didn't play until 73, but he was drafted in the 68 draft. You got 3, 2 more.
Bob Rigby.
No. Although it's a crime he's not in yet.
Bruce Arena and Claudio Arena.
No. Bruce Arena's in the Hall, and he was drafted by the Cosmos in 73, but he's not in the Hall as a player. You know the one, you're being coy. I'll help you with the one's kind of forgotten. Glenn Myernick was drafted #1 overall by Dallas in 1977. The Trick. You want to do it?
Go ahead.
All right. Tab Ramos was drafted by the Cosmos in 1984, but did not do it Obviously, he didn't make his career in the North American Soccer League because it rather inconveniently folded on him. So,
Jersey Eagles. That was his first pro team, Jersey Eagles.
yeah, and yes, that's right, it was. So, that's all I have. Any questions?
Good research.
Thank you. You'll find, I think you'll enjoy the paper because it has a lot of quotes and things like that, and the data gets even heavier. So thank you for your time, and it's been a real pleasure.
And speaking of the papers, we will have hard copies that will turn into PDFs and post on the site or sent through our email and archive here at the National Soccer Hall of Fame. Jim Trecker was asked for those.